Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for registering for Census Chronicles, exploring U.S. federal and New York State Census treasures. I'm the junior librarian here at OCPL Central Library in Local History and Genealogy. My name's Kate Kisselstein. We're going to go through, this is kind of more of an overview of some of the records, along with some tips and tricks for searching. We'll get into the overview, but I will ask if you could all mute yourselves until the end. I will make sure that there's time for question and answer session. And with that, we can get started. So first up will be just an intro into census records and genealogical research. Part 1 will cover U.S. federal census records. Part 2 will be New York State census records. Part 3 will cover mortality and other census schedules. Part 4 is we'll just touch on lost and missing records as well as where to look for them. And then part 5 is some tips and tricks for searching the records. Lastly, we'll have that Q&A. So census records and genealogical research. The records give important information about your family, such as the names and ages of family members, and in more recent censuses, their relationships to one another, and give the location where they lived on a specific date. A census record may be the only record available for documenting the events of a person's life if no other records exist. A census can extend your pedigree further back and add missing or additional family members. And there is a high probability of finding the person for whom you are searching in a census, since about 90% of U.S. citizens are listed in the censuses. Censuses are readily available on the internet at several websites where they're indexed and are usually easy to search. I'm going to touch on some really good reference resources that I came across during my research. The first one is this one, the Genealogist Census Pocket Reference, Tips, Tricks, and Fast Facts to Track Your Ancestors. If you get this out of your local library or from your favorite bookseller, it is definitely pocket-sized, and it packs a lot of information. And one of the key things it has is it shows maps for each year of the census. Each year they did the census, there's a map outlining the locations that were covered for each census. And it was truly invaluable. The next up is, many of you will probably be familiar with Quillen's Essential Genealogy, Mastering Census and Military Records. I did use the 3rd edition, which is listed here, and this one outlines all the key information you need to know in order to best utilize census records in your genealogical research. In addition to the information on federal and state censuses, they have sections on the mortality schedules as well as alternate such census schedules and records. And the last one I'll highlight is State Census Records by Ann S. Lanehart. Now, this was written in 1992, but there's a lot of key information on the state census records, which, spoiler alert, New York State stopped taking the census after 1925. So especially if you're dealing with New York State census records, this volume is really handy, but it outlines for every single state in the union. And this one's also available from your local library or interlibrary loan or your favorite bookseller. I did make sure they're all. I know Amazon's not a great word for some of you, but I did make sure they're all available on Amazon for a reasonable price. So first up is the U.S. federal census records and why we have them. It's been required by the Constitution since the beginning of the United States. The actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years after the first meeting of Congress of the United States, and within every subsequent term of 10 years in such manner as they shall be by law direct. and that's Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution from 1787. Every decade, the U.S. Census Bureau conducts a population count known as the decennial census. This nationwide survey takes place in years ending in 0, specifically on Census Day, which was established as April 1st with the 1930 census. The data gathered from the decennial census plays a crucial role in determining the allocation of seats in the U.S. House of Representatives for each state. The inaugural U.S. Census occurred in 1790 during the first term of President George Washington, with Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson spearheading the initiative. At that time, the population was recorded at 3,929,625, and based on these figures, Congress distributed 105 seats among the 15 states. There are other dates, before 1930, there are other dates. So this, with the census dates, designated by Congress, census enumerators collected information on the household exactly as it was on the official census date, including those households that were visited days or weeks after that official date. So for as you can see from my list here, it wasn't established. April 1st was not the census date until 1930. It jumped around, including the one that was interesting to me is that in 1910 it was on April 15th, which of course we all associate with tax day. So that had to have been interesting for some folks. You know, you have census takers show up at your door and you're like, I'm working on my taxes. But the only state that wasn't collected in 1930 was Alaska, whose census date for that year was October 1st, 1929. Now, the instructions for each census were to not record anyone born after the official census date, but some families were confused and reported the birth anyway. This was likewise true for deaths. If a person died after the census date, but before the enumerator visited, a person was to be counted for that census. Again, because of confusion, the dead were sometimes not counted. And we've got a census timeline here. Just gonna slide that up. The census timeline, this one is 1787 to 1840. So first off, the Constitution is ratified, requiring a decennial population count to apportion representatives in Congress. In 1790, federal marshals count 3.9 million people in the first census by going door to door through the 13 states, plus the districts of Maine, Vermont, Kentucky, and the Southwest Territory. In 1820, respondents are asked if they are engaging in agriculture, commerce, or manufacturing. 1830, we see the first printed questionnaires used for collecting census data. In 1840, questions on agriculture, mining, and fishing are added to the census. And the next one is 1850 to 1880. In 1850, we finally have that all free persons are recorded by name, along with their occupation and place of birth. 1861, the census data is used during the Civil War to measure relative military strengths and manufacturing abilities of the Union and Confederacy. In 1868, the 14th Amendment is passed, which ends the 3/5 counting rule for African Americans. And that was 3 out of every 5 counted as one person for purposes of apportionment. In 1870, American Indians are first enumerated, excluding those living on reservations. In 1880, Congress establishes a census office in the Department of the Interior. 1890, this is the first census to use punch cards and an electrical tabulation system. In 1900, Departments of War and the Navy enumerate military personnel, including those who were abroad. In 1902, Congress authorizes a permanent census office, which is transferred the following year to the Department of Commerce and Labor. In 1913, however, the Department of Commerce splits with the Department of Labor, bringing with it the U.S. Census Bureau. In 1919, Congress allows individuals to request copies of the census for genealogical purposes. And that's the first year that we see that mentioned for census records. So in 1921, this is probably known to some of you at least, but the 1890 census returns are destroyed by an unexplained fire in January of 1921. 1930, following the onset of the Great Depression, the Census Bureau begins asking questions about unemployment and income. In 1940, the Census Bureau creates an additional long form to be answered by a small percentage of the population. In 1950, we see the first use of a computer, UNIVAC 1, to use to help tabulate the results. In 1960, questionnaires are mailed to urban households to be completed and mailed back to the Census Bureau. In 1970, for the first time, respondents are asked to check off whether they are of Spanish or Hispanic origin or descent. In 1990, the census is the first to be less accurate than the count preceding it, with an estimated 8.4 million people missed and another 4.4 million people counted twice. In 1999, the Supreme Court rules statistical samplings cannot be used to apportion congressional seats. 2000, for the first time, the Census Bureau runs a nationwide advertising campaign to encourage people to fill out their forms. And in 2010, the long form is replaced by the Census Bureau's annual American Community Survey, which I'm sure some of you saw during 2020. So now we come to the 72-year rule. This was something that interested me because I did wonder why we had 72-year rule. The National Archives, shortly after its establishment, secured an agreement with the Bureau of the Census to obtain decennial census records from 1790 to 1870. This occurred in 1942, making the records accessible for research. The 1950 Federal Records Act imposed a 50-year limit on restricting access to executive agency records, including census records. Archivist Wayne Grover assured eventual access for researchers, with closure periods beyond 50 years as a possibility. The Federal Records Act, taking precedence over earlier laws, authorized the National Archives to open census records once they reached 50 years of age. Recognizing the need for a longer restriction, not due to longevity, but due to privacy and confidentiality measures, on October 10th, 1952, Director Roy V. Peel and archivist Wayne Grover agreed to implement a 72-year closure period for population census records transferred to the National Archives. And the simple reason it's 72 years is because the 1870 census was released in 1942. So here's the official ruling, is that the U.S. government will not release personally identifiable information about an individual to any other individual or agency until 72 years after it was collected for the decennial census. The 72-year rule restricts access to decennial census records to all but the individual named on the record or their legal heir. The 1978 agreement codification. Congress resolved the Archivist Bureau of the Census disagreement by codifying the 1952 agreement, and legislation mandated that personally identifiable information release align with the 1952 agreement, except for the individual named or their legal heir. Changes require joint approval and publication in the Federal Register. So the 72-year rule release. After 72 years, the National Archives releases census records to the public. The 1930 records were released in April 2002, and most recently, the 1950 records were made public on April 1st, 2022. Next up, we have enumeration district maps. This is a geographic area that an enumerator or census taker could completely cover within 2 weeks in cities and within 4 weeks in rural areas. The Census Bureau prepared maps of these districts for 1880 to 1970. In most years, the census was taken by county. Within the county or other major civil division, many subdivisions may have been used. Township, city, precinct, town, village, district, division, or ward. Enumeration district maps show the names of political jurisdictions, such as counties, cities, townships, and so forth, roads, waterways, and large properties, such as parks, cemeteries, prisons, golf courses, and so forth. In cities, maps may indicate boundaries of wards and other subdivisions. The Census Bureau annotated the maps with red, orange, yellow, and green pencil to show enumeration district and various political boundaries. Enumeration district numbers were usually written in orange pencil. These numbers had two parts, such as 48-69, where the 48 prefix was typically for the county and the 69 suffix was for the specific area within the county. Independent cities and very large cities, such as Chicago, had their own prefixes instead of using the county prefix. Thus, although Chicago is within the boundaries of Cook County, enumeration districts in Chicago had a prefix of 103 instead of Cook County's prefix of 16. So there are some viewing options to see these enumeration district maps. The three following websites currently have some of the maps available to view online, while other maps are only available to view on microfilm or microfiche. And one thing to note is that the Family History Library in Salt Lake City, Utah, has photocopies of the full-size maps available. So it could be worth a trip. And so the locations are National Archives. Some of the maps are available to view online, while others are on microfilm. One place that they are definitely viewable online, One Step by Steve Morse was highlighted by the Census Pocket Reference, and that is, you can, he has finding transcribed ED, enumeration district descriptions in One Step. Not all, I couldn't get all the images to load every time, but it was more so when I was on a slower computer, so that's something to take note of. But it also does provide the microfilm numbers that you would need for requesting the microfilm to view. The Family History Library, of course, has their digital library, and you can search by city. And while many of the maps have been digitized, they also have many maps on microfiche. But you can actually browse the maps on Family Search, which was really interesting to look at. So to use the enumeration district maps effectively, you'll need an address for your target person as close to the census year as possible, particularly if they were a city resident. Sources for addresses include birth certificates, prior census records, city and county directories, court records, death certificates, funeral home records, heredity or lineage applications, land and tax records, letters and postcards, marriage and divorce records, military records, naturalization and passenger arrival records, and school records. Note that in some states and territories, county divisions were not clearly defined, may have changed, or were referred to by other names, or may not have even existed at all. While the National Archives doesn't have pre-1880 enumeration district maps, it does have descriptions only for 1830 through 1870. Note, however, that most of the early district descriptions are general and largely served as documentation of the names of the enumerators and rates of pay. Steve Morse's website has a lookup for the 1880 to 1950 censuses enumeration districts, including the option to search by city, thus allowing you to locate the enumeration district for those ancestors who weren't city dwellers. And this can help you narrow down which census you need to search. So now we move on to New York State census records. So why state censuses are important. According to Quillen's Mastering Census and Military Records, as helpful as the U.S. censuses are, many of the states and the territories before statehood conducted their own censuses. Often overlooked, these censuses provide yet another source for locating ancestors, seeing if they remained in the area that they had been in during the U.S. Census, identifying children who may not have been born at the time of the federal census, etc., etc. Some characteristics. These can be similar to their federal counterparts in regards to errors such as misspellings and inaccurate dates, so be sure to look for supporting information from other sources as well. Typically, these were not enumerated in the first year of the decade. Most, in fact, would generally be taken in the years ending in 5. And some states conducted these censuses frequently, so you're in luck if your ancestors lived in Michigan, New Jersey, or New York, and others only once. Colorado's was only done in 1885, and Connecticut I saw that they were only enumerated in 1917 in terms of when they were a state. There are colonial records, however. And some didn't conduct them at all, particularly if they entered the Union later than others. A more complete list for each state can be found in the Genealogist Census Pocket Reference, including years of any colonial and territorial censuses. So why we had the New York State Census? I gave you that spoiler alert earlier, that we stopped in 1925. So it was required by the 1777 New York State Constitution, Article 5, and it mandated that a census of electors and inhabitants occur every 7 years after the initial census. There was a reapportionment basis, and the census conducted in 1790, 1795, 1801, 1807, 1814, and 1821 formed the basis for reapportioning Senate and Assembly districts. The 1821 New York State Constitution mandated an enumeration of inhabitants in 1825 and every 10 years thereafter. The last state census was 1925. The census of 1925 marked the final state census conducted because of a constitutional amendment that occurred in 1931. And that was voters approved amendments in 1931, rescinding sections mandating a census every 10 years for apportionment purposes. The 1892 New York State Census. Now, of course, this is the fun one because we jump from 1875 and then after it, we start with 1905. And so the New York Family History Research Guide and Gazetteer highlights that the absence of an 1885 census was due to various political and bureaucratic issues. As reported in an April 3rd, 2020 Lockport Union Sun and Journal article, Governor David B. Hill deemed the 1885 census redundant to the federal census and an absolute waste of the people's money. Consequently, the state opted for a census in 1892, skipped 1895, and later resumed the pattern, conducting state censuses in 1905, 1915, and 1925. This interruption of New York State's regularly scheduled census can actually be a boon for researchers. The 1892 census is a valuable substitute for the destroyed 1890 U.S. federal census. The information included in this census is a little less detailed than in the immediately preceding state censuses, as it has name of each household member, their age, gender, and race, birthplace, but country only, citizenship status, and occupation. This state census is an every name index to the state's inhabitants as of February 16, 1892. It does not cover the entire population of the state of New York. Some of the modern day counties did not exist in New York State in 1892. New York City, for example, organized its 5 boroughs 6 years later in 1898, and New York created Nassau County that same year. Only 40 of New York's counties were covered, and in this list, any that are bolded indicate that they are missing or lost. So the surviving ones are Albany, Allegheny, Broome, Cattaraugus, Cayuga, Chautauqua, Chemung, Clinton, Portland, Delaware, Dutchess, Erie, Essex, Genesee, Greene, Hamilton, Herkimer, Kings, or Brooklyn, which became Brooklyn, Lewis, Madison, Monroe, Montgomery, Niagara, Onondaga, Ontario, Orleans, Oswego, Otsego, Queens, and Queens are the surviving counties. The 1892 state census original copies were held by the individual county courthouses. Several of the counties did not keep copies of the original records, and therefore there are no known copies of the following counties, which you can see listed here. So now we move on to mortality and other census schedules. Mortality schedules were done 1850 through 1900. Mortality schedules are a component of the U.S. federal census and provide valuable insight into deaths within a specific time frame. These schedules cover a single year from June 1st of the year preceding the census to May 31st of the census year. For example, June 1st, 1849 to May 31st, 1850, which is the one that my great grandfather appeared on. So these schedules are often overlooked, but they can be a goldmine for genealogy researchers, offering a snapshot of deaths within the community during the specific year. Mortality schedules typically include details such as the deceased individual's name, their age, sex, race, marital status, place of birth, occupation, cause of death, and the month of death. So the mortality schedules were part of the U.S. federal census in various years, including 1850, 1860, 1870, 1880, 1885, 1890, for the records that survived, and 1900. Researchers can use mortality schedules to fill gaps in family histories, understand community health trends, and gather information on ancestors not found in other census records. Despite their importance, mortality schedules may have omissions or inaccuracies, and surviving schedules vary by census year. Researchers should cross-reference with other records for validation. Genealogists can access mortality schedules through archives, libraries, and online databases, enhancing their ability to uncover vital details about their ancestors' lives. Note that for New York State, these only exist for the 1850 through 1880 censuses. There are other other census schedules. First up, we have slave schedules. Separate slave schedules were enumerated during the 1850 and 1860 U.S. federal censuses, but only as nothing more than tally marks under the slave owner's name. The categories were much like early federal censuses. It reported age, gender, and sometimes race. Note that for both 1850 and 1860 censuses, a slave was supposed to be enumerated by name if they were over 100 years old, but reported ages, according to Quillen's book, are, quote, generally considered to be notoriously wrong, unquote. An exception to the above would be if a large plantation was to be enumerated as a whole, then the names of the plantation slaves would be included, but this was sporadic at best. Other census schedules, military veteran schedules. For this, this was also done for the federal census. Veterans of, for the 1840 census, that's what's under my notes there. Veterans of the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812 or their widows were enumerated in a special schedule located on the back pages of the census. The schedule was titled Pensioners for Revolutionary or Military Services, included in the foregoing. Included were their names, ages, and residence. For the 1890 federal census, this information was enumerated for veterans of the Civil War and the Mexican War. Additional information included service provided by the veteran, their rank, company, regiment, or vessel, dates of enlistment and discharge, length of service in years, months, and days, plus any disabilities that the veteran may have had. And note, while all but 1% of the 1890 U.S. federal census was lost in a fire in January 1921, most of the veteran schedules were not lost. There is these schedules are available for 34 states, the District of Columbia, Indian Territories, plus naval yards and ships. No 1890 veteran schedules exist for the following states: Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, Idaho, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, and Kansas. And note that portions of Kentucky's and Louisiana's veteran schedules are also missing. The 1910 census simply asked if individuals were survivors of the Union or Confederate Army or Navy. There was a special interim census in 1885. This was funded by the federal government for a handful of states: Colorado, Florida, Nebraska, plus the New Mexico Territory and the territories of North and South Dakota. The enumerator essentially asked the same questions as the 1880 census, and the enumeration date for the census was June 1st, 1885. This often overlooked census can be beneficial for those who have ancestors who lived in those areas, especially when you factor in the loss of the 1890 U.S. federal census. Native American census rolls. These were done 1885 to 1940. Special schedules within the U.S. federal census documenting individuals in Native American communities or on reservations. These recorded tribal name, tribal affiliation, family relationships, and demographic details for administrative purposes. And then there's also, you may have heard of Dawes rolls in connection with Native Americans. These specifically pertain to the 5 civilized tribes: Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole under the Dawes Act of 1887. These were compiled to facilitate land allotments by listing individuals applying for tribal membership and land allotments. The key difference is that the Native American census rolls were broader, encompassing various Native American communities, while Dawes rolls focused on specific tribes and were integral to the allotment process. One interesting schedule that I came across was specifically for deaf couples. This little-known schedule was funded by the federal government as they were curious about their deaf citizens. Whenever an enumerator came across a husband and or wife who were deaf, the couple would be asked to complete a 4-page form. The completed forms were studied by both the government and the Volta Laboratory and Bureau, which was the brainchild of Alexander Graham Bell, whose wife had been deaf from early childhood. Information included names, date and place of marriage, total number of children, how many of those were deaf, names and birth dates of children, death dates of children, if applicable, names of both sets of the couple's parents, including mother's maiden names, death dates of those parents and their age, if applicable, names and birth dates of the couple's siblings and whether they were deaf, plus if the couple's deafness was congenital or not. So it's a treasure trove for anyone who might have an ancestor that's listed on that schedule. Other census schedule, the last one I'll touch on is the defective, dependent, and delinquent schedules of 1880. This supplemental schedule included different forms to enumerate the following classes of individual. And these are the terms that were used in 1880: insane, idiots, deaf mutes, blind, paupers and indigent persons, homeless children, and prisoners. In addition to the basic census information, individuals with mental or physical illness were asked about their medical history, while homeless children were asked questions about their parents, and prisoners were asked to supply details about their imprisonment. Individuals found in this schedule will also be indicated by a mark in one of the columns 15 through 20 in the main 1880 federal census. So lost or missing records. Lost records, the 1890 U.S. federal census. All censuses miss some individuals here or there, but in some cases, records have been lost for various censuses and counties or cities. The largest record loss occurred in January of 1921 when a fire in the Commerce Department damaged or destroyed the 1890 census. Only 1% of the 1890 census documents survived the fire. As per FamilySearch.org, that 1% equals 6,160 names. So you're in luck if your ancestors are among them. The following population schedules have survived for the 1890 federal census. For Alabama, the District of Columbia, Georgia, Illinois, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, South Dakota, and Texas. And for New York, specifically, it's Suffolk County, Brookhaven Township, Westchester County, and Eastchester Township are the ones that survived. So, but we do have missing records for New York State as well. The only missing federal census records for New York State, aside from the 1890 federal census to date, are the 1810 records, but only for Cortland County and part of Broome County. A lesser-known fire occurred on March 29, 1911, at the New York State Capitol building, where the state library was housed. Among the holdings were state census returns for 1801, 1807, 1814, 1821, and 1850 to 1905. The thick in there next to the 1850 is the book supposes that is actually meant to be 1855. But there were 750 volumes and the additional 100 volumes presumably representing the 1905 census. The 1911 inventory afterwards states that portions of the returns for 1801, 1814, and 1821 were saved. All the other returns, which were not in the manuscripts room but on one of the upper floors of the library, were completely destroyed. Fortunately for our research today, I later found the county clerks had retained copies of their portion of the state census returns and were able to make those available so that we have those records. We do have access to those records today. So now we come into some tips and tricks for searching the records. You do experiment with a site's search tools, including entering different search parameters and spellings. Do look for site-specific search tips to see whether you can use tools such as wildcard symbols or Boolean searching to catch mistranscriptions and unexpected spellings. Do try searching with a name. Enter other information such as the person's place of residence, birth date, where applicable, immigration date. Do seek alternate spellings of names that can't be found by sounds like. For example, I have one ancestor whose name was Cornelia, and her name was entered on one census as Pamela. Don't expect to find an ancestor on the first try, particularly if they have a common name. Don't assume that the site's data match everything you understand to be true about your family. Names may be spelled differently, for example, or people may have reported different ages, or where applicable, different immigration dates from what you found in other sources. And don't assume it's your ancestor just because the name is right. Multiple people could have had that same name, as I know all too well with my great-great-grandfather, Thomas Patterson. Do try putting the surname in that first name field and leaving the surname field blank. Do search a site's individual census databases one by one, as you can sometimes enter other information that will help narrow down the results. Don't assume that because your ancestor's name doesn't appear that they abandoned their family or died. Even if, like me, you're still trying to figure out just where great-great-grandpa was in the 1900 census when his wife was listed as head of household. Do leave out the name entirely and search on other variables such as birth date, residence, place of origin, and where applicable, immigration date. Do be flexible about results. Your ancestors might have lived in a different location than you expect, or a completely different birth year could have been recorded. One family I researched came over from Ireland in 1850, and the wife gave birth on the ship. Just 2 months later, the infant was listed as being 2 years old and having been born in Vermont. So, and don't give up readily, but do take breaks if you're continually hitting a brick wall, and seek help from your favorite local librarian. With that, I'm opening this up to any questions. And I'll stop sharing. There we go.
Where are some, I have a question. Where are some of the early Onondaga County census records located? Are they at your library or?
Yes, they are. We have some on microfilm and some we actually have some physical books for that are obviously in delicate condition. But we have them on microfilm.
Okay.
I have a question. You mentioned that the New York State from 1855 to 1905 were missing, and then counties have made up the problem. Sorry about that. Where can we find those New York State censuses?
Oh, the New York State, well, we have access to the microfilm here at my library. You can find them through interlibrary loan. You can also find them online with searching, and you can use your favorite genealogy site like Ancestry, Family Search, MyHeritage. Those because the records were able to recreate what they needed. at the New York State Library. So the New York State Library has them, but that was the thing. The counties had to help out the state, as it were.
Thank you. That's great to know.
Kristen, I have a question. I cannot find my aunt on the 1900 census. She was born in 1898, and her parents were living separately in a boarding house. Her older brother was living with a paternal grandmother, but I can't find my aunt. Are there any tips? She is reunited with the family a few years later. I think I found her. I don't know if
Yeah.
it was the 1905 or
In the
I'm not sure what
1905.
census, but I can't
Yeah.
find her. I don't know. I've looked at all the relatives that I can think of that she might have been with, but
Yeah, it is possible she may have been put in an orphanage for a
Yeah.
time.
yeah.
And that did unfortunately happen sometimes, where you'll see the children were taken to an orphanage and stayed there for a few years, and then were reunited with the family.
Yeah, and I've tried to look through the ones that I thought maybe the Catholic,
Mhm.
foundations or whatever, and I just keep not finding her, I don't know if there's any other, like schedule or, compilation of the orphanages, at that time, if, people were financially troubled.
They did do institutional ones, so it's possible. It's possible the record does exist. I'm not as familiar with those yet, but that is something that I plan on uncovering. I uncovered so many different schedules that are available in addition to the census records, that I could probably do one on census alternate records. So, but yes, there are institutional records that exist.
Okay, thank you.
I,
What happened?
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I know that the orphanage in the Binghamton area was listed in the 1950 census, because I was looking for a relative and a friend, and they were in there.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, Katie, you have a question?
Yes, in regards to what Mary Beth was just asking about her aunt she can't find,
Mhm.
my grandmother, who lived in Syracuse in 1950, took in a friend's child who lived in Rochester. So maybe her aunt is taken in by another city by just a friend of the family elsewhere, not
Oh,
necessarily in the same area.
That's a great suggestion.
yeah, that is a great suggestion.
Yeah, thank you.
I saw in the chat, somebody mentioned that the person might just not have been mentioned. I did find that out from a relative. Somebody wasn't listed in the census, but they knew for a fact that the person was in the house.
Yeah. Oh, and we have a question in the chat. Some censuses mark addresses for rural districts as RD number. Is there a way to determine the area covered in those numbered rural districts? Yes, using those enumeration district maps, if you view them, if you go in and view them, you can zoom in and find locations. I tried to get one that would fit on a slide, but then it's like by the time I fit it on the slide, it was going to be too small to see even online, to see any detail. So, but they do have a lot of detail available there. Does that answer your question, Cameron? I hope. Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments that anyone would like to make?
I've had pretty good luck with finding people in state hospitals in New York and Vermont, and also orphanages. I did find a great aunt in a orphanage in 1900 in Vermont.
Oh.
And I contacted them because it had very, very limited information. I wanted to know what happened to the parents, or, some kind of information. And they said, we have the records, but they referred me to their attorney, and he won't even respond to me. So
Oh,
but
wow.
I figure 100 and almost 25 years that, it wouldn't be, an invasion of that person's privacy. They were just a child. So
Right. Yeah, it
I
is
just,
interesting that some records are locked no matter what. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, because I had the same problem with my relative in Binghamton. They referred me to an attorney. I emailed him several times and called the office, and he never responded.
so I guess, Carolyn, that's a no. They don't respond, I
Yep,
guess.
probably right.
And
I was still holding hope.
I've also had pretty good luck with, and I don't know if you touched on it, but the agricultural schedules.
Yeah, I
both-
actually I skipped right over those, but yes, there's agricultural schedules as well.
agricultural and commercial. And I've
Yes.
had good luck with both in the US and in Canada. And it gives you kind of a snapshot of what that person's farm was, what implements they had, what house was on the property, what they were growing, what they were selling, what kind of animals they had. Were they making wool out of the lambs? Were they making that into fabrics, and were they selling that? So, I was able, I'm talking specifically about Canada, but I think it would be the same for New York State, that it gave you kind of a snapshot in time as to what was going on at that particular farm at the point that they took the survey.
Yes. Thank you.
And Kristen, what was the reason that you said the state census was discontinued after 1925?
It was a voter measure in 1931. So 4 years before they were going to take the next census, they decided to discontinue taking a census
Because it duplicated the information from this
yeah, mainly
US
because
census?
there was a bit more to it than that, but generally yes, because it duplicated information, and they thought it just, was cut, basically the same reason that the 1885 wasn't taken. They thought it would cost the taxpayers too much money, and in 1931 they agreed.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see. Oh, and we do have another question from Cameron here into the chat. Is it possible that the 1865 New York State Census would count soldiers in their family's household before they returned from the Army? That one, it wasn't, I couldn't find information directly on that one. I do know that there was the Army and Navy did have a census that they completed. So I'm not sure if I wasn't certain about the New York State one. That's why I left that one off, but I'll have to look into that. And then Leanne said, I was told by my local historian that New York State has a law that their documents should be available to New York State residents for free. So is there a way to look at New York State records on Ancestry for free? Well, you can look on ancestry.com with the basic account. That they do have a free account. But you can also look on Family Search, which you can have a free account that provides a lot of access. Now, yes, it is run by the Mormon Church, but you don't have to be religious in any way, shape, or form to use their site. So I would actually recommend going on Family Search, because they have access to a lot of digitized materials, including many of our 40,000 volumes. Oh, Leanne says, I wasn't asking, I was sharing. I see. I thought because if there was I thought it was because of, is there a way where you had, is there a way to look at New York State records on Ancestry for free? Yes. Yeah, thank you for sharing that link, Liam. Yeah. All right. Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
Jim, I just wanted to clarify, you said you can set up a free account on both of those or not?
Yes, you can set up a free account on both of those. Ancestry has more restrictions on what you can view, where Family Search does not. So, and the only thing with Family Search is, if you're building a family tree, is that it's a collaborative one. Other relatives can be working on the same individual as you, and it could be relatives you don't even know. So surprise, you've made some family connection. But that's the thing. It's a lot easier to access their records, and they have a ton of information. They have a lot more detail. They have a lot more detail available they have a research wiki that you can go in and search by Hamlet even. So if you know that they came from, say, Little Utica, for example, that's a local hamlet, then you can even search on that. It would provide more detailed information about any missing census records for specific locations.
Yeah, to emphasize on Family Search, that's my first go-to site, the Research Wiki, and then their card catalog.
Yes,
Because they
definitely.
have actually a lot more vital and historical records online than Ancestry.
Yeah.
And it's just all you do is just sign up with the username and a password, and that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Kate, I just want to mention something about scans. To me, all scans aren't equal. So you may find a New York State's census record on Ancestry, MyHeritage, Family Search. You might find it in multiple sources, but if you look at them carefully, you'll notice that some of them are much better, much clearer, especially if it's because I download a lot of things.
Okay.
So I'm not always a paying member in Ancestry, so I might download a New York State Census and attach it to a person's profile on Ancestry. But I try to look for, if you will, the best scan.
Okay.
The clearest, the one that, because sometimes the writing is so difficult to read.
Yes.
And sometimes I know some of these organizations have gone back and rescanned, vital records or census, because the original ones that were done 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago are not very good quality.
Oh, yes. Thank you for that, Scott. Very good tip. Yes. Okay. Now, as I said in the beginning, I will be sending out the handout and copies of the slides later on this afternoon. And the recording should be up next week. That's my goal anyway. I ran into a snafu where I was having to try and edit the closed captioning, but we may just be releasing without closed captioning, just because it takes a significant amount of time to go through and kind of parse out what all the words are. So I'd rather get the videos out than delay them like last the one from 2 weeks ago has been delayed. But thank you all for coming. Our next genealogy one will be on Friday, February 23rd. I believe I've got that date right. And we actually have with Heather, it'll be with Heather Bright, and she'll be taking us through a case study of searching through with African American genealogy with one of her ancestors. So we look forward to that. And if there are no more questions, I will see you all next time. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you,
Thank
Kristen.
you, Kate.
Thank
Good
you, Kate. That was
presentation.
wonderful.
Excellent program.
Bye.
Bye.